Middle-earth is more than just land. It is the memory of ancient heroes and the terrors that awoke with the first light of dawn today. An old wizard will tell you yet another legend, so you may understand that even the darkest times can give birth to light in the far north of Middle-earth, where the wind whistles through broken peaks and the moon casts silver shadows on fields of frost. There rose a mountain of blackened stone. Its name was Gundabad, long ago in ages lost to the memory of most folk. It was a place of honor and birthright to the dwarves, for beneath its vaulted heights Duran the Deathless first awoke. But that time had faded in a myth, and now the mountain was a place of dread. The orcs had taken it, filthy, snarling things that crept from deep crevices and old forgotten tunnels. They made their lairs in the ruined halls, their drums echoing in places where once dwarves sang songs of stone and starlight. Smoke curled from cracks in the earth, and those who passed too near swore they heard a sound not of horn or hammer, but a low thunderous roar, not of any beast known to the free peoples nor the mountain itself, but something deeper, something waking far to the southeast. In the iron hills a dwarf named Thra Stonehelm stood in the great hall of his kin, his gray-streaked beard braided with iron rings, and his eyes fixed on a trembling stone laid upon the floor. It was a warning stone carved with runes that glowed faintly when danger stirred. In ancient places now it shook with a quiet, regular rhythm, as if some dark heart far away had begun to beat again. Thra frowned. Gundabad, he muttered at groans. Beside him stood his closest counsel, Brun the Tall, and a black-bearded youth whose axe was still bright with polish. Dan, son of Doran. Both looked to their lord with unease. We must know what stirs, Brun said, voice low. No tremor has reached us from the north in an age, and the scouts say the vale of Anduin hears the same, rumble some. Say the mountain speaks. Fra turned to the long map of the north stretched across a stone table. His hand hovered over a Gundabad, then moved slightly west to where the old dwarf road once ran beneath snow and shadow. Not all voices come from mouths, he said. Sometimes the earth speaks, and sometimes it is something beneath the earth. He dispatched ravens that night, their wings black against the starlit sky. One to Rivendell's seat of the elven law masters who knew the old things and the older names. One to the rangers of the north, those silent watchers who moved like whispers in the wild, and one to a cousin in the blue mountains whose dreams have been troubled by shadow. Within a fortnight answers came. The first was a rider tall and hooded, his eyes gray and bright. He named himself Alric of the Dunedain, and bore a token sealed with the mark of Eland. He said little, but listened closely, and when the sound of the stones tremble was laid to his ears, he palled dead. It is like the cry of the wind folk, but deeper. Alric murmured, not wind nor wave, but the fall of a great weight, like a gate closing or chains slipping from ancient doors. The second guest came with greater light, a golden hay elf named Mrill, whose voice bore the calm of deep waters. He brought scrolls bound in silver thread, and in his wake came the Cinnapine. In dusk there are records, Mathril said, of something buried beneath Gundabad, not built by dwarves nor orcs, older than both. A prison perhaps, or a tomb. What kind of prison, Thra asked. I'm not meant to be open, said the elf. One that should never have been found, but found it had been. Even as they spoke the wind changed, and the north wolves howled in daylight. Stone cracked without cause, and near the foothills of Mount Gundabad a company of orcs was slaughtered, not by blade nor fire, but by force unknown. Their bodies were crushed, their armor bent, as if by unseen hands, and their leader in Urukai, with eyes like burning coals, was found impaled upon his own pike, his mouth gaped Open in silent terror, the black roar had begun in the iron hills. Throg gathered his war gear, chain forged in the deep forge's helm crested with dragon bone. He spoke before his kin in the heart of the stone-vaulted hall, where flames danced upon the walls and echoes clung like ghost Gundabad is ours by blood and by right. He said, if it falls to madness, we will know why. If it can be saved, we shall do so. And if it is lost, we will lay it to rest with honor, but we will not cower in our halls. While the dark speaks with voices none dare name so, he called a company to him, 30 stout warriors, ironclad and grim Brun the Tall, with his great hammer of silvered steel Dynager. For glory Madril the elf, for wisdom, and Auric of the north, whose blade was long and silent, they left beneath a blood-red dawn, and the black roar echoed again, not just in the stone, but in the hearts of those who had once forgotten fear. The road to Gundabad was long and bitter, carved through wind-cored hills and forests. Grown wild with age, the company moved like a shadow across the land, swift and sure, yet heavy-hearted, for the tales of the black roar had spread faster than they could ride in the villages of men. Along the foothills of the gray mountain, shutters were barred by day, and fires burned through the night. Children spoke of dreams where mountains groaned and voices called from deep places. Hunters returned with hollow eyes, their game forgotten, their minds wandering strange paths. And always at the edge of hearing came that sound, low and dreadful like a whisper beneath thunder, like a cry from a mouthless dark. It grows stronger, said Merrill, his golden hair cloaked in ash and wind. Even the trees speak of it. You hear trees now, do you? Grumbled Brun, trudging beside him. I always have, Medrith said softly. You simply do not listen. They passed through ravines where the stone was split, as if by claw. They found abandoned watch posts, dwarvish stonework, shattered runes, defaced with dark signs none dared name here. And there they found bodies, orcs mostly, but some men too, and even beasts, all broken in strange ways, torn from within, or crushed, as if the air itself had turned to iron. Thra said little he kept. To the head of the company, his eyes fixed on the north, on the shadow that hung like a storm cloud over the distant peak of Gundabad. Its slopes gleamed black in the cold sun, and those snows should have covered them. None fell. The mountain was bare, stark, and brooding. They made camp one night upon a ridge overlooking the northern vale, and Auric the ranger stood long upon a crag, his cloak billowing like a banner of dusk. Majorly joined him. You feel it to thee? Elf asked. Ilrich nodded slowly. It is not a sound alone. It is a do you know to whom it calls? The ranger's hand tightened around the hilt of his sword. No, but I fear it waits for an answer. That night, as the fire crackled low, Throg gathered the company and spoke the tale of Gundabad. His voice was gravel, shaped by battle and sorrow. Long before the orcs came, before even the great kingdoms of Khazad and Erebor were forged, Gundabad was our cradle. Durin the deathless awoke by the lake that slept beneath its roots. There he saw the stars reflected, and there he dreamed of what might be built. But the mountain turned against us. Orcs came in the dark days of Morgoth, and though we fought and bled, we were driven out. Gundabad became a den of filth and ruin. His eyes gleamed with firelight, yet there are deeper stories, whispers that before Duran ever awoke, before even the elves sang by starlight, Gundabad was hollowed by something else, not dwarves, not orcs, not any hand known to us. Something ancient, something buried. Mrill stirred in the elder tongues of the Eldar. There's a word thou meaning depth of ants, some said. It was a wound left by the fall of Morgoth himself. Others said it was a gate to what Dana asked. His young face pale. The elf did not answer. The silence was long and even the wind seemed to hush. Then came a sound not from the mountain, but from the vale below, a howl, not of wolves, not even WS, but something larger, more terrible, a voice like stone scraping against stone drawn long, and lo, the company sprang to. Armed shields were raised axes, unslung arrows knocked from the mist. Below shapes began to rise, tall, hunched, many-limbed, trollsome thought. But their limbs were too many, their skin glistened like oil, and their eyes were red. In unblinking form ranks bellowed, teach, or the creatures came fast, and crawling, half running, half slithering their mouths, yawning wider than any beast. The first met Brun's hammer, and fell bones breaking like dry twigs. Dan cleaved through another black, blood spraying in arcs. Ilrich moved like a shadow, his blades, singing Mrill's arrows, flashed silver in the dark. But still the things came silent, relentless, bearing no weapons, but with claws like chisels and teeth like obsidian. One reached Teachar and lashed out, striking his shield with force that rang like thunder. The dwarf staggered, but did not fall. He drove his axe deep into the thing's chest, and as it died, it let out a strange, almost mournful cry. Then, as quickly as they had come, the creatures withdrew, vanishing into mist. And night, no tracks were left, no bodies remained, only the blood smoking slightly in the cold air, and the memory of that hideous silence. The company stood panting, blooded, shaken. What in all the deep halls were those? Brun gasped. I do not know, Mr. said, but they were not made for this world, not by Aou. Any of the valor. Auric knelt beside a black smear on the stone and touched it with a gloved finger. He sniffed, then frowned. It is not blood, he said, it is stone. Melted and weeping, the wind changed again, and somewhere far above from the throat of Mount Gundabad the black roar came once more, louder, closer, and filled with fury. Dawn broke gray and joyless, veiled in a shroud of mist that clung to the rocks like breath from some unseen. More no bird sang, no beast stirred. The trees themselves seemed bowed in silence, as though listening for the black roar. Thra stood watch while the others broke camp. His axe was laid across his knees, and his gaze did not stray from the dark line of Gundabad in the distance. Once when he was young, he had dreamed of returning to that mountain, not as a warrior, but as a prince, to reclaim the lost hall of Duran and sing once more beneath its vaulted sky. But now he feared that the mountain remembered nothing of light, and even less of hope. Ollie approached him, his boots leaving no sound upon the frost-hardened ground. The tracks have vanished, the ranger said. Even where we saw the beast fall, there is no mark left behind it. It's as if they were made of shadow and mist. Frame nodded slowly. Then we must be nearing the source that day. They crossed the northern spur of the mountains, where ancient battlegrounds lay buried beneath snow and silence. They passed cairns marked with runes, so old even Bruni could not name them, and a shattered archway that once had borne the crest of Duran's folk. Now it stood half sunk in the ice, its stones blackened, as if by fire. Madel paused beneath the arch and placed a hand upon the charred stone. This was no forged fire, he said quietly. This stone has felt the breath of something worse than dragon flame. Dan, who had said little since the battle in the night, looked about uneasily. My father fought in the war of the dwarfs and orcs, he muttered. He told me tales of what lay in the deep places, things the orcs bred in darkness, trolls twisted by sorcery, beasts that screamed without mouths. But he never spoke of these shadows, because even shadows can be forgotten, said Madel, but not destroyed. As the sun wheeled overhead, a storm began to gather behind the mountains. Black clouds rose with unnatural speed, and thunder boomed. though no lightning struck the air, grew heavy, and more than one dwarf clutched his beard and muttered charms beneath his breath. At last they came to the edge of the vale of Gundabad, a desolate expanse of stone and ash where nothing grew. The mountain loomed. Above them a great fong of black rock jutting into the sky. Smoke coiled from cracks in its flanks, and the wind that blew from its heights was bitter with rot and iron. "We camp here," Thra ordered. "We go no further until nightfall. We climb under the stars." Alric raised a brow. Strange counsel for dwarves. Thra's eyes narrowed. "This mountain knows our steps. It watches in the day, but in the dark its eyes may sleep." So they waited. Tents were pitched low against the stone, fires were kindled with care, and rations were taken in silence. Madriel busied himself with ancient scrolls, his fingers tracing forgotten glyphs as his lips moved without sound. Brun sharpened his hammer's edge, and Dan, restless, walked the camp's edge, his axe ever at the ready. As dusk fell and the stars emerged, Mathril spoke. "I have found a name," he said, "buried in the lay of Elmire from before the sun rose. It speaks of a prison built in the time of the shaping of Ardora, a vault forged not with doors, but with oaths. A place called Gashner the Flame that hungers. A chill passed through the company. What was kept there?" Ilrich asked. Madel's voice was grave. "No tale. Says only that it was buried beneath stone and marked with a song that none would dare sing. Could this Gashner lie beneath Gundabad, Thra?" "Ask the signs match, and the black roar. It could be the hunger." Waking silence fell again. Then a horn blew on the mountain. It was not an orc horn, no shrieking brass, nor iron clash. It was deeper, smoother, like the bellow of fell beast. And it came not once, but twice more. Echoes rang from the cliff. Stone shuddered, and something answered, not with a horn, not with voice, but with a tremor that shook the bones of the earth. The black roar rose again. This time none could mistake it. It was a voice not of words, but of power, a cry from the deep long bound. Now, slipping its fetters, it rolled over the valley like a wave, and every member of the company felt it in their hearts. It spoke not to the ear, but to the soul, and its call was not for peace. It was a summons. Ollie stood ashen-faced, clutching his sword. It knows we are here. Then the ground beneath them cracked, and the mountain groaned like a thing waking from slumber. Gundabad had heard them. Night fell like a great cloak upon the vale of Gundabad, yet no stars shone overhead. The sky churned with black clouds, lit from within by occasional flashes of sickly red, as though fire smoldered behind a veil. The very mountain loomed as a living thing, a presence in the dark that breathed slow and deep its breath, a wind laced with dust. And Ash Thra stood at the head of his company, his axe across his shoulder, a silver lantern at his belt, casting pale light upon the ground. "This is where we climb," he said, voice low but steady. They moved in silence, not up the mountain's face, but toward a hidden path known only to the dwarves of old, a winding stair carved into the rock, choked now with years of neglect and rubble. It lay behind a curtain of hanging stone, obscured from the eyes of orc and beast, a secret long kept in the hearts of Thra's kin. "We called it the Path of the Roots," he murmured to Alric, "because it winds beneath the roots of the mountain. Before rising into the great halls, few living dwarfs have walked it, fewer still have returned. The way was steep and narrow. Cold air flowed upward from unseen depths, and the stones beneath their feet bore strange marks, claw-like gouges in the shape of no creature Magil could name now. And then the walls of the pass trembled faintly As if the mountain were coughing in its sleep after hours of climbing, they reached a landing where the stairs split into 3 branches. Medril laid a hand upon the stone, closed his eyes, and whispered in Quenya this way. He said at last, pointing to the leftmost stair, "It bears the echoes of song, old and sorrowful." Brunei eyed him skeptically. "You hear songs in stone too?" "I do," the elf replied, "though these are more like laments than tunes." As they climbed further, the air grew colder. Heavier, a darkness thicker than night gathered around them, pressing in from all sides. Not the simple dark of sunless places, but a gloom of spirit, one that clung to thought and memory like cobwebs. Even the lantern's flame dimmed, as though struggling to survive. Then they reached it, the hidden gate it was. Not tall nor grand, but a low arch set into the mountainside, half buried in frost, and fallen stone carvings ran along its lintel, nearly worn smooth by time. Thra brushed away the snow and read aloud the runes, his voice hushed. "Here lies the way to that which was lost. Let none pass, save those who bear the burden of memory." He placed his hand to the center of the arch for a long moment. Nothing happened. Then softly the stone beneath his fingers pulsed with a dull glow. The door creaked open, not outward nor inward, but downward. Vanishing like a sigh into the rock, a foul gust spilled from within, air old and damp, tinged with rot and iron. It stank of graves long undisturbed. "Stay close," Thra commanded. "Speak no names below." One by one they entered the passage, descending into the bowels of Gundabad. Inside, the halls of old Dwerulf were choked in silence. Dust hung in the air. Like mist statues, a proud king stood toppled, and broken their faces, worn smooth, their axes cleaved into the carvings on the walls, grew twisted. The deeper they went, as if the stone itself had been reshaped by torment. Methril placed his hand to a relief and drew back with a hiss. "This stone bleeds." He showed his fingers slick with a black AK that steamed in the cold air. "No craft of dwarves would do this," Thra growled. "This is corruption." They passed through what had once been a great hall, now collapsed in places, its pillars buckled. In its center lay a vast chasm, the floor sundered by forces unseen. A thin red light pulsed far below, as though a heart beat deep within the earth. There they made camp, though none truly slept. The warriors sat in a ring, their backs to the darkness, eyes flickering toward every shadow. Auric stood watch beside the chasm, one hand ever on his sword. In the second hour of the watch, Dan rose and crept to where Medril sat, and thought. "My lord elf," the young dwarf said softly, "do you believe it speaks to us, the roar?" Medril opened his eyes. "Yes." "Then what does it say?" Madel looked toward the abyss. "It says we are too late." Before Dan could reply, a cry rang through the halls. One of the guards, Talon, son of Iraq, was gone. His post was marked only by a smear of ash and a shattered axe. There was no sound of struggle, no sign of a body, just a whisper, soft and sibilant, as though someone had exhaled a word too ancient to understand. "Thou dumb frame gave the order. At once we press on. If we tarry, it will take us one by one through crumbling passages and vaults of ruin." They moved ever downward, drawn not by choice, but by need. The mountains seemed to twist around them, corridors turning where they had not before, stairs leading to places unknown. At last they came upon a gate unlike any other, a vast door of stone and bronze fused shut by heat and time. No rune marked its face, no sign showed who had built it, yet all felt the weight of it, as though it looked back at the metal step forward. "This is the seal of the prison." Thra raised a brow. "How do you know?" "Because it breathes." A low rumble shook the floor, and a voice louder than thunder, yet heard only within, filled their minds. Who dare the black roar did not come from beyond the door. It came from behind their thoughts. The breath of the mountain turned bitter, like the week of coals long drowned, and flesh long rotted before the great door. None spoke, none moved. Each soul in the company felt at a presence ancient and immense, not merely behind the gate, but around them, beneath them, within them, like an eye opened not in space, but in memory. Who dares the voice it said? Not aloud, not in any tongue of elves, dwarves, or men, but in a language that spoke through bone and blood. It was not a question, it was a judgment. Dan dropped to one knee, clutching his head. It burns inside my thoughts. Brun pulled him back, shielding him with his frame, while Madel stood tall and grim, his hands raised before the door. This is not a gate forged by hands, he murmured, but by wills of valor, or worse, the seal holds barely. Eric stepped forward, his face drawn and pale. It speaks in dreams. I have heard it before in the north wind. When I wander the waste, I thought it madness. Now I know it waits. It has always waited for his grip tighten on his axe. Then it shall wait no longer. The company turned to him, eyes wide. You would open it, Madril said. I would face it, Thra replied. Whatever it is, if this be the prison that Gundabad has become, then I would see the prisoner. We cannot cleanse the mountain of this darkness unless we meet it in truth, or we release it. Bruneld, and doom us all. Drain's voice was firm. We came to reclaim this place, not just with steel, but with knowledge. If we fear to see what lies beneath, we yield the mountain to shadow. Forever a heavy silence followed. Then Medril stepped forward. There is a right, he said, not of elves, but of the ivory, those who never saw the light of Valinor. They forged bindings of thought, and will seals of silence. This door bears their mark. He reached into his satchel and drew forth a thin scroll wrapped in bark, etched not with ink, but with silvery dust. Unfurling it, he whispered the first lines. A wind stirred not from without, but from within the hall. The fire and their torches guttered. The mountain moaned, and the great door began to glow, not with light, but with shadow, a deep pulsing blackness that crawled like ink across its surface. Metal chanted, his voice low and melodic, the ancient syllables strange and trembling. The scroll's dust lifted into the air, swirling like mows of ash. As he spoke the final word, the glow faded and the silence returned. Then a single crack, the door split down the center. Stone groaning like a beast roused from slumber. A hiss escaped from the gap like steam rising from ice, and slowly the seal began to part. A darkness poured forth, not the absence of light, but a presence that devoured it. The torches flickered and died. The air thickened as if filled with invisible water. A few dwarves fell to their knees, choking. Madril gripped a silver charm about his neck, and Eric drew his sword, though its blade seemed to absorb what little light remained. Then it came from beyond the broken seal. Something stepped forth, not a creature, not as the eye would know it. No shape, no limb, no face, just a shadow rising like smoke and hunger, tall as the archways of Khazad, and vast as the fear in their hearts. It did not walk, it spilled like ink across a page, and the very stones recoiled, but in its midst a voice formed. Again, not from mouth, but from mind. I am Norash, the forgotten flame, Middle Earth, staggered face white. That name it is from before the moon, before the sun, a servant of the dark power, who ruled before Morgoth himself, took up crown and sword. Dan stared in horror. How is it still alive? It never died, said Auric grimly. It was sealed, buried beneath, stone bound, and silence. Norgash pulsed, and with it the mountain shook. Dust rained from the ceiling far behind the path they had come through, collapsed. Entombing them, you are the first, the voice whispered, and through you I am reborn, Thra. Step forward, axe gleaming in the shadow. You speak of rebirth, beast, but all I hear is ruin. You are a thing of fire and fear long buried, and we will bury you again deeper. Still the shadow, twisted a laugh not of joy, but of mockery rippled through the air. Your flames echo. I am its source. You cannot slay what burns without end. Then it struck not with claws or fang, but with a wave of dread rolled out from the heart of the shadow warriors. Fell screaming, clutching their heads. Brun staggered to his knees. Even Alric dropped his sword teeth, clenched in pain. Only Madel and Thra stood firm, Medril raised both hands, light flaring from his palms, elven light, drawn from stars long dead. And Thra, charge his war cry, rang like a bell across the ruin for Duran's crown, for Gundabad. He leapt into the heart of the darkness. The black roar rose again, and the mountain answered with fire. Into the shadow he leapt. THR, stone helm, heir of the Iron Hills. Last of the line to remember Gundabad, not as a tomb, but as a cradle of kings, his axe forged in the old ways and tempered in dragon fire, flashed once in the dark like a falling star. Then the gloom swallowed him whole for a heartbeat. Nothing moved. Then came the clash metal upon something that was not flesh, not stone, but will made form. A shock wave burst forth from the shadow, hurling Madriel to the ground and snuffing what little light his magic had. Some in the chamber groaned, and cracks split the pillars like spider webs across ice frame. Brunard dragging himself to his feet, but the dwarf lord was gone, lost within the heart of that coiling void. Alaric, grim-faced, took up his sword once more. Its blade, though dim, whispered faint light. He turned to Madril, who now staggered upright, his hands bleeding from channeling light against so dark a foe. We must aid him, Ilrich said, or he dies alone. But Madril shook his head, his face stricken with awe and fear. This is not a battle of blades alone. That shadow is not merely spirit, it is memory twisted into flame. It devours, courage drinks, fear unbinds the soul. To strike at it is to offer your mind, as kindling a scream echoed from the dark, not Thrain's, but something worse, a sound as though metal screamed and stone wept. Then suddenly from within the blackness a light blazed, a single flame. It burst outward, not from Madril nor Alric, but from the heart of the darkness itself, and at its center stood HR. He held his axe, two-handed, its head wathed in fire, not red nor orange, but a cold silver mover light. His armor smoked, and his beard was singed, but his eyes shone with something ancient wrath. Without fear, I do not burn, he growled through clenched teeth. I am stone, I endure. He struck again, and this time the shadow reeled, nor shrieked, not in pain, but in fury. The shape of it faltered, swirling into writhing coils that snapped and curled across the ceiling. Fire licked the walls, and from the broken seal behind the gate molten cracks began to spread, pulsing with each beat of its rage. Metal called out, "Now strike while it is weakened." The company, wounded though they were, rose with one heart. Brun bellowed his great hammer, smashing into the stone beside the flame. He enjoined, eyes wide with terror, but alight with purpose, his axe cleaving through tendrils of shadow. Sitch moved swift as a gale blade, dancing like light on water. He slipped through the darkness, striking not at the creature, but at the runes on the wall, the ones that had bound it before. I cannot slay a fire without form, he muttered, but I can rekindle the cage. He turned to Madel the seal. Can you remake it? The elf hesitated not, as it was the rite required, a silence that was never broken. We have spoken names, awoken the past. The old spell is sundered, then forge a new one, Adri said. or we die Madril closed his eyes and began to sing. It was not a battle hymn, nor an elven lament. It was a song of shaping of starlight upon water of the first light that fell upon Middle-earth before time's great wound is. Voice echoed in the chamber of balm against the storm and wear. It touched the walls, the fire faltered, frost struck again, his axe meeting a core of the shadow that sparked with every blow. Sing louder, elf. He roared. I think it hears you, the creature screamed once more, and a final shock wave burst forth, hurling them all back. The seal, now aglow with Madel's song, shimmered with threads of silver and sapphire. Like spider silk woven from moonlight, Auric drove his blade into the center of the pattern, a final anchor for the binding spell. The sword caught the glow, drank it, and burned with it. Now Thra. Madel cried, drive it back. The dwarf lord surged forward, battered, bloodied, burning with resolve. He lifted his axe, its half cracked, its edge broken, and with a final cry cast it into the heart of the shadow. There was no explosion, no thunder, just a moment of utter stillness. Then, like mist before the sun, nor ash dissolved, unraveling in slow, reluctant streams of darkness that faded into the stone, howling in a voice that was not sound but fury. Made silence, the mountain groaned and fell quiet. The fire faded, the seal closed once more, and the chamber was still. They lay there, the company, among broken stones and smoldering embers, breathing hard eyes. Widebrun sat up first, coughing. Is it over? Metal nodded, though. He looked wearied beyond words. It is bound again, not as before, but sealed enough. For now Auric helped Thra to his feet. The dwarf's beard was singed nearly to ashes, armor scorched, but he stood unbowed. You live, Auric said. Thra gave a tired smile. I told you stone endures. But even as they laughed, the elf's gaze turned downward. Cracks still marked the floor. The seal glowed faintly, but pulsed like a wound. Not a wall, this is not the end, Madel said quietly. It will stir again one day, then others will come. Thra said, let them find our mark. And he took a chisel from his belt and carved his name into the stone above the gate. Thra, son of Thra, for the house of Duran. Then he turned and led his company from the dark behind them in. The deep, the black roar slept, but it did not forget. They emerged from the mountain as dawn broke, if it could be called dawn. The sky above Gundabad was not golden nor blue, but shrouded in iron-gray mist, and the sun hung low and pale, as though reluctant to rise over so haunted a place. Yet to the eyes of those who had passed through fire and shadow, even that dull light was a blessing. Thra stood atop a wind-scoured ledge near the mountain's eastern shoulder and looked down upon the vale. From here he could see the ruins of ancient dwarf roads, overgrown and broken, and the blackened scars where the orcs had once built crude fortresses. But he also saw the glint of old stone hidden beneath ash, the bones of Gundabad's former glory. It is not yet ours, he said, half to himself. But it could be again. Behind him, the company gathered, fewer than they had set out with. Of the 30 who had descended into the mountain, only 17 now remained. Some had fallen to the shadows, some had vanished, taken by the hunger without a face. Yet those who had survived bore a fire in their eyes, a light earned in darkness. Brun limped forward, his arm bound in a sling. We should return to the Iron Hills, let the mountain lie until it cools. Butra shook his head. If we leave now, it will fester again. We must cleanse what remains. Magil stood beside him, the morning wind tugging at his golden hair. He seemed older, somehow his face touched by grief. The seal will hold for a time, but it is not eternal, he said. What was once buried beneath Gundabad was not merely a Creature was a wound in the world, and wounds bleed. Then let us bind it, Thra said, not only with song, but with stone. He turned to Auric. You are a son of the north. Will you bear word to Rivendell? Tell them what we face. Tell them the fire sleeps again, but it may wake the ranger. Inclined his head. I will ride as soon as we reach the foothills. And you, Maedal Thra? Asked the elf, looked up toward the peak. I will remain for a time. There are words in the stone, yet unread memories that might teach us what lies deeper still. And besides, he looked at the dwarf lord and smiled faintly. You will need one who can hear the mountains sing. So it was that the company set about their final task, to cleanse the lower halls of Gundabad, not with war, but with purpose. They moved room by room, clearing the filth of centuries. Orc banners were torn down, and burned cracked statues were righted. The old dwarf rooms were re-etched in a stone, not for pride, but for remembrance. In a chamber just above the Black Seal they laid the bodies of the fallen, entombed with honor, their names inscribed in Khuzdul for all time. Thras set a watch at the deepest hall, where the black roar had once risen. A great iron door was forged anew, reinforced with silver, and blessed by Madril and the tongue of the elder Brun. The wounded oversaw the rebuilding of the path of the roots, ensuring that no dwarf would again be caught unknowing in the maze of tunnels below. And all the while the mountain remained quiet. Days passed, then weeks, and slowly life returned in the high valleys. Birds began to sing once more. Elk walked again where once only wolves had dared. The wind lost its sour taste. Even the stone, it seemed, sighed in relief. One morning Dan stood with Thra upon the eastern parapet, gazing out over the vale. His beard had grown fuller, and his eyes were keener than when it first set out. I did not think I would live to see the sky again, he said quietly. Nor did I, Thra replied. But we did more than survive, we reclaimed something. Dan looked up at the peak, still wrapped in mist. Will we rebuild it, all of it? Thra did not answer at once. Then he said, not as it was too much has changed, but we will build something new atop the bones of what was not merely a fortress, but a lighted place to remember that night a new fire was lit in the halls of Gundabad, not the red, writhing fire of corruption, but a hearth flame, steady, golden warm around it. The survivors gathered. Dwarfs sang songs again, deep and rumbling in Madril's harpwa. Notes like falling stars into their tune. Auric, before his departure, offered one final toast to those who did not flee the roar. And in that moment something old stirred, not in darkness, but in hope. A presence not of shadow, but of memory, a flicker of Duran's dream. For though Norosh now slept beneath the seal, the spirit of the mountain had begun to wake, and this time it was not a black roar that echoed through the stone, but the sound of home returning beneath. The stones of Gundabad were shadows, still clung like roots in old earth. The fires of the hearth could not reach, though the upper halls began to breathe anew, echoing again with song and the ringing of hammers. The deep ways, the forgotten veins of the mountain remained silent, and still. Yet silence in such places is not peace, it is waiting. Mril knew this. While the dwarves toiled in the rebuilding, the elf descended alone each night, bearing with him a lamp of starless and a staff carved from the bough of a Malorn tree. He walked the lower halls where the heat of nor had cracked the stone, where old tunnels buckled inward and whispers echoed that had no speaker. He marked the walls with glyphs of warding, elvish signs of stillness and watchfulness. He left no footstep in dust, for the mountains still listened. On the fifth night he found a door that had not been there before. It was set into the side of a long sealed passage, smooth and black, as if born of obsidian, with no seam, no hinge, no handle, just a surface cold to the touch. And carved with a single rune half buried under soot, he cleared it with a gloved hand. The symbol was one he had never seen, and he had walked in the libraries of Imladris, had read scrolls sealed since Balerion sank beneath the sea. But this rune pulsed faintly in his sight, though his lamp did not touch it. He stepped back. "This is no dwarf make," he whispered, "and no craft of the Eldar." And then the air changed. A breeze, stirred though none should have moved, so deep it carried not the stench of the black roar, but something older, colder, a memory that did not belong to Middle-earth. Metal left swiftly, and when he returned to the surface his face was pale and his hands trembling. He went straight to Thra. "There are doors yet uncounted," he said. "Passages untouched by even the oldest map. Something stirs beneath the seal, not the roar itself, but what it called to." Thra frowned. "We saw the thing vanquished the seal holds." "Yes," MRA replied, "but it was not alone. Norash was not the prison's master at that silence fell." And then the dreams began. They came first to Dane, visions of great black towers rising from seas of ash, of flames that whispered secrets in dead tongues, and to Brun, who woke weeping from nightmares of fire, devouring gold of axes, melting in the hands of warriors who screamed without sound. Even the stone began to groan again at night, not in pain, but in hunger, and Ilrich, who had left Gundabad to carry word to Rivendell, turned back within days, his face grim. "I found no peace in the woods," he told Thra. "The birds fled me, the rivers hissed. Something rides the wind behind me, something not yet born." But close to waking the dwarf lord listened, then summoned a council there beneath the half-repaired vaults of the mountain. The leaders gathered, what remained of the company of the roar, from Mathril, Auric, Brun. Dining the old fire burned between them. "This mountain is not yet ours," Thra said at last. "We drove back one shadow, but it was only the herald. A deeper dark lies beneath." Mrill agreed. "We must find it, or it will rise when we are weakest. And what if it cannot be found?" Brun growled. "What if it lies beyond our reach, behind walls not meant to be broken?" "Then we must seal it where it lies," said Ilrich, "and make Gundabad a watchtower, not merely a home." Thra nodded slowly. "Then so be it. We hold this mountain not as kings, but as wardens. Let the deep know that it is watched from that day forward. The dwarves of Gundabad did not dig deeper, they built upward. They cleared the upper halls, reworked the towers, and reforged the gates. Watchposts were established along the winding paths. Signal horns were set on the battlements. 3 notes for fire, 4 for shadow metal. Remained more spirit than flesh's eyes. Often turned toward the chasm sealed by elven rite and dwarven iron. He wrote what he could into song, in a script, and a warning. And Thra carved a great stone upon the highest tier of the mountain, inscribed in Kdul Quenya and the tongue of men. "Here lies the black roar bound in fire. An oath let none wake, it let none forget, for the mountain remembers winter. Came snow, cloaked the peaks, and for a time peace held yet in the stillness of the nights and the hours when even stars seemed to pause. The wind sometimes carried a low, distant sound, like the breath of something vast, and sleeping a sound not unlike the beginning of a roar. Snow fell in veils upon the shoulders of Gundabad. The mountain stood shrouded in white silence, its highest towers lost in cloud, its lower slopes a tapestry of frost and ruin. And yet within its bones the forges burned, a new smoke curled from stone chimneys, faint as the breath of old giants, and the ring of hammer on anvil echoed once more through the waking halls. But the peace was uneasy. Ike of the Dunedain stood watch at the southern gate clad in a cloak of gray and fur-lined mail, his sword across his back, and his eyes ever turned to the horizon, though he said little. He had not slept well since his return. In his dreams the lands of the north burned beneath a pale sky, and voices without faces whispered words that turned to ash on waking. Thra kept to the deeper halls more often now. He had taken to carrying 2 axes instead of 1 and a runstone around his neck that pulsed faintly when a mountain stirred. The weight of kingship pressed upon him, not the crown of command, but the crown of vigilance. One morning, as the sun crept through iron gay clouds, metal summoned them all to the Hall of Echoes, so named for its strange acoustics, where even the softest word could be heard as if shouted from afar. There upon the floor of polished obsidian he laid out 3 fragments of black stone, each etched with delicate runes that shimmered faintly red. I found these in the forgotten halls beneath the western ridge, he said, sealed behind a wall that bore no opening until last night. Thra eyed the fragments wearily. What are they? Keys, Madel answered, or remnants of them, not made to open doors of wood or iron, but doors of thought, doors of binding. Brun crossed his arms, eyeing the shards. You think they were part of the first seal? No, the elf replied. They predate even that. These were made by those who first found what sleeps here, who tried to warn the world and failed. Ilrich's jaw tightened. If these are keys, what lock did they once hold? Major did not answer. Instead, he laid his hand upon the stone and closed his eyes. The hall grew cold. The air shifted like breath caught in a throat, and for a moment all saw a vision, not with eyes, but with memory. A city of shadow, high walls of black basalt towers crowned in flame. In its heart a pit not dug, but fallen, a wound in the world deep and endless, from which something climbed, not a beast, not even a spirit, but a presence, clothed in fire, crowned in hunger. Then the vision faded. Metal drew his hand away, breath ragged. That place lies not in this age, but its echo remains in the depths beneath Gundabad. A silence followed, heavy as a tomb. Dining, standing near the wall, broke it. You mean to say this mountain is built at top one of the dark places? Madril nodded. One of many scattered across the world, some buried, some drowned, but few as awake as this. Ilrich drew his cloak tighter. And if the black roar was merely its voice, what happens when the rest of it wakes? Thra stood slowly. Then we must ascend again, he said, deeper than before, to where even our fathers dared not tread. Brun snorted. Have you gone soft in the head? Then we sealed the beast. The halls are ours now. Why stir what lies below? Because Madel said softly, it stirs already. That night the mountain groaned again, not in rage, not in pain, but in yearning. From the lowest vaults came the sound of water dripping where none flowed. Runes flickered on stones long, dead, and a deep hum, a tremble in the bones of the rock, began to beat like a heart. The next morning Thra summoned 10 of his best veterans, grim and silent among them Brun and Din stood once more, though neither smiled. They bore torches and rune lamps, weapons of silvered steel and blades inscribed with words. Madril walked beside them, staff in hand, the 3 shards bound in a case of glass, and gold. Auric followed, last, his eyes scanning every corner together. They descended down through the newly cleared halls, past the chamber of the Black Seal, deeper still, into places untouched by sun or song. They passed beneath arches twisted with carvings of eyes and flame. They crossed bridges over chasms that whispered without wind, and at last they reached a chamber not marked on any map, a great rotunda of obsidian, its walls ringed with broken pillars. At its center lay a pit, shallow at first glance, yet so dark that no light entered it. Around its edge stood statues tall, and faceless arms crossed each, bearing a single rune on its chest. Magil stepped forward, breathing shallow. This is not dwarf make nor elven. What is it then? Dan asked. The elf looked at him, eyes distant. This is a watchtower, he whispered, but for those within, not without. Suddenly the pit stirred. A whisper rose, not a voice, but of memory. I see you. The torches flickered from within the pit. Two lights glowed, faintly red, as dying stars. Eyes the black. Roar was not alone, and it was waking the eyes. In the pit burned like coals beneath deep ash, dim, but unblinking. Around the chamber the air thickened, not with heat, but with weight, as though the stone itself bent toward that watching gaze. No one spoke, not even THR. Then a sound rose, soft scraping like bone dragged over iron. It came not from a pit, but from the statues. The faceless guardians that ringed the chamber began to tremble. Dust spilled from their arms, cracks laced their stone skin. Then all at once they moved with grinding groans. The statues lifted their arms and turned inward toward the pit. They pointed not at the darkness, but at the company back. Throb barked, raising his axes. Circle the pit. Keep it to your left. The company shifted into a ring, weapons drawn, lamps flaring. Mr. held aloft the room case, the three ancient shards within beginning to hum, faintly vibrating with a rhythm that matched the tremble in the earth. Auric's voice was low. They're not statues, they're wardens, and they no longer know friend from foe. One of the figures stepped down from its plinth, 7 foot tall. Its body was stone-shaped like armor, but beneath the cracks light, a deep red glow pulsed within like a forged fire. Without flame, it moved like a sleepwalker, slow, but inexorable. Then the whisper came again, not from the pit this time, but from within each heart. You are the key. Madel's eyes widen. The shards, it knows them. It's calling to them. The light in the pit swelled, and the warden lunged. Its first strike split a stone slab where Brun had stood moments before. The second swept toward Auric, who rolled beneath the blow and slashed upward as blade bit stone. But the light within the creature surged, and it barely faltered. These things can't be slain like beasts. Brunner, they don't bleed. Then we break what binds them. Throsh shouted. May thrill the runes, can they be turned against it? I don't know, the elf cried, retreating toward the edge of the chamber. These keys were made to seal, not destroy. Then seal it. 2 more wardens stepped from their stations. One was met by Dan, who charged it with reckless fury. His axe rang against its chest, sparks flying. It staggered, but its hand snapped forward like a striking snake, and the young dwarf was thrown hard into the wall, his helm clattering. Loose Thra reached him and pulled him clear up. Lad, you're not done. Yet Mril dropped to his knees at the rim of the pit. He opened a room case. The shards pulsed brighter now, and from their edges flowed tendrils of red light, arcing like lightning into the void. A voice spoke, rising from the deep, soft and slow. But one binds, one breaks. The runes flashed, the light arced upwards, and the third shard shattered. And Madriel's hand, a scream, not of pain, but of release, echoed from the pit. And the wardens stopped frozen mid-step. Their glowing hearts flickered. Then they turned not toward the company, but toward the pit. They stepped forward slowly at first, then all at once, rushing into the darkness, leaping like doomed sentinels into the black. Their glow vanished one by one, until the last light was swallowed. Then stillness returned. Mril collapsed, blood trailing from his nose, his fingers blackened by the rune's backlash. Eric caught him before he fell fully. What did you do? I changed the lock, Medril whispered. I unbound the guardians, let them turn inward, but he looked down into the pit. It stirred. It's not a voice anymore. It's becoming The walls trembled, the light returned, but not from within the pit. It came from the walls themselves, glowing glyphs appearing across every stone, ancient and alien, spiraling in patterns that no mortal hand had drawn, and one by one they began to vanish, erased, as though swallowed by fire. Thra turned to the others. We must retreat now, but the seal broody started cannot be restored with broken keys. Made not now, not here. Ilrich nodded grimly. Then we fall. Back we seal the entire level, we bring it down. Stone and all, Fra lifted Madel onto his shoulders, back to the breach. Move they ran the halls, shaking behind them. Glyphs flared and died. Dust fell like snow somewhere. Far below, a sound grew, not a roar, but a breath vast and slow, inhaling the silence of centuries. Behind them the pit began to glow, not red, but white, a pure, blinding light that burned without warmth, and from it a shape began to rise, not shadow this time, but something worse form. The black roar was no longer a whisper in the dark. It had found its shape, and it had seen them. They ran, hearts pounding, boots echoing like drums in the narrowing halls. The mountain behind them trembled, not with the fury of collapse, but with the deliberate beat of something rising, something that had never known form, never drawn breath, but now shaped itself from the very stone it had once whispered through. It was no longer a roar. It was becoming a presence. The air grew thick, not with heat, but with pressure, as if each step downward dragged it there. Limbs as though the mountain itself wished to hold them in place. Lamps flickered, torches died, the walls seemed to close in, narrowing, warping, ancient carvings curling into twisted symbols no hand had ever carved faster. Thra roared, his voice ragged. He bore Madriel across his shoulders, though the elf stirred now and again, whispering half-forgotten names. Dynan blooded, but upright, supported Brun as they stumbled through a colonnade that had not existed before they shift Aurikis the halls. They're moving, no, Thra growled. It's moving behind them. A sound echoed, not footsteps, not claws, but something worse, the sound of intent, not wind, not fire, a pulling like gravity, like the voice of something long buried, calling everything home. Then a voice low and all-consuming rumbled through their bones. You were not meant to leave. They emerged into the vault of the black seal, the chamber that once held Norgash's prison, but the seal was gone where once had stood. Rune-bound iron and rings of silvered stone, there was now only a hole, a great wound in the earth yawning wide, and from its depth came a glow like dawn, but not of the sun. It was white, pure, consuming. Madriel stirred weakly and raised a shaking hand. Not light. He croaked, unlight. Auric dropped to his knees beside him. What do you see? The elf's gaze trembled, his eyes unfocused. It does not want to destroy, it wants to replace, to overwrite. They felt it. Then each in their own way, a pull on their souls, like the slow unwinding of memory. Names began to slip from the mind, the taste of home, the sound of laughter, the faces of kin, all began to fade, not into forgetfulness, but into something else. Ilrich pressed his hand to his head. It's rewriting us. Bayan screamed, clutching his chest. I can't feel my father's name. Brun dropped to his knees. I had a brother. Didn't I? Thra stood firm, gripping his axe like a banner. No, no, we are stone. We do not forget. He laid Madriel down, stepped to the edge of the pit, and drew from his belt a runstone he had worn since they left the Iron Hills. It was small, carved with his name and the name of every ancestor. He bore the line of Durin etched in fire and time. He held it high, I remember. He bellowed by the fire of Owl. I remember the stone. Flared in his hand, brilliant, and blew. The pole faltered just for a moment, but in that heartbeat Mrich rose and hurled the two remaining rune shards into the pit. They spun like falling stars, one of binding, one of sealing, and as they fell, Madel shouted the words of the final, right the one, not meant to be spoken aloud, not by elf, not by man, not by dwarf. Sh joined the chant, his voice low and clear, then Thrain his voice rough with fury, then Brun then in clutching what memory he could the glow. Dimmed the pit screamed, not with sound, but with raw negation like a silence, so vast it crushed song like a void that choked light. But the right held the shard, struck the base of the abyss, a shockwave burst outward, blasting air and ash, and light the mountain shook harder than ever before. Cracks ran through the chamber walls, stone, collapsed pillars buckled. Run, Ilrich shouted, the mountain falls. They fled stumbling up the final passage. Behind them the seal reformed, not crafted, not built, but willed into being by the last strength of those names, those memories, those songs that would not be unmade. Above the high halls of Gundabad cracked and roared the towers, shuddered the wind, screamed. But the mountain did not fall, it breathed. And slowly the tremors ceased, the black roar was gone, not sealed, not caged, spent, and in its place silence real, true silence, not of fear, but of peace, the sky above. Gundabad was clear for the first time in living memory. The mists had lifted from the peak, no smoke rose from hidden crevices, no foul wine stirred. Instead, the sun shone cold and golden upon the snow-bound stones, casting long shadows like fingers stretching down from the heights of heaven. The mountain had survived, but more than that, it had changed. Within its halls, light once again dwelled. Torches flickered in niches carved by ancient hands, and the great braziers of the upper vaults glowed with a steady flame. The walls no longer moaned, the stones no longer bled. The black roar was silent in the chamber of remembrance. Beneath a newly raised arch of mithril and granite, Thrain's stone helm stood before a wall of names. The stone was smooth, and upon it were carved the runes of the fallen, not just those who had perished on their descent, but the names of the forgotten, the lost, those whose memory had been threatened by the unmaking force beneath. Dan stood at his side, his beard trimmed his armor. Burnished, they say the mountain is awake. He said softly, it is. Thra replied, but not in anger. What is it then? Damon asked, now that the shadow is gone. Thra's eyes scanned the wall. It is what it once was, and what it may yet become, a home, a guardian, a memory, kept from the eastern gate. Alric approached, cloaked in gray, his eyes bright in the pale light. I've received word from Rivendell. He said the watchers in the north no longer hear the roar, and the dreams have ceased, and Madel Thra asked remains, said the ranger. But not here. Ilrich turned toward the mountain's peak. He's gone to the summit to carve the final song high above the halls beyond the stairs of the watchtower and the ivory of the ravens. Madril sat alone on a shelf of stone where the sky met the earth. Before him was a slab of granite unmarked. In his lap a harp of silverwood rested, and there beneath the clear sky and the light of Aenir, he sang. His song was one of endings, but not despair. He sang of Thra and the brave who followed, of Brun's unyielding hammer, of Din who clung to memory when all else failed, of Alch the shadow walker who bore hope in silence. He sang of the roar not as a terror, but as a warning, a cry in the dark that was heard and answered. And he sang of Gundabad, not as it was in ruin, but as it had once been in the beginning. The harp's voice carried on the wind down through the broken peaks into the open doors along the corridors, now scrubbed of ash. Those who heard it, dwarf man, elf, stopped to listen for it, was a song of peace, hard, one of darkness overcome, not with fury, but with remembrance. In the forge's hammers rang again, not for war, but for craft children of dwarves ran through halls once haunted the mountain lived, and in time it would sing again epilogue years past, and tales of the black roar became stories told by hearts passed from elder to child. Some believe them legend, others knew better. At the foot of Gundabad's eastern stair stood a monument plain, unadorned. It bore no carving of kings, no boast of victory, only a single inscription carved in the tongues of all free folk. We heard the roar, we did not run, we remembered. So the mountain remains, and above high in the clouds where snow-kissed stone and ravens wheeled on the wind, a single light flickered, a beacon lit not by oil or flame, but by memory of flame that no darkness could ever drown again. Thus ends the tale of the black roar of Gundabad.